What is something that most people believe that has been widely debunked? Story 1, that a lady bought coffee at McDonald's, tried to put cream and sugar into it while driving, with the cup between her legs, and sued after it spilled and burned herself. The reality is that McDonald's served their coffee at a temperature way above what safety codes called for. The lady was not driving, her son was, and they actually parked in the parking lot of that McDonald's after going through the drive-thru. The lady's burns were also severe third-degree burns that require skin grafts. There's images of those burns floating around that are so very not safe for work. There was an entire documentary about this on Netflix regarding this case and how people believe the first paragraph. Story 2, astronomers here. One that I've always had people tell me casually, and then their surprise isn't true, is the idea that there are more births and higher crime rates during a full moon. The thing is, many studies have been done investigating this, and there is no such correlation. So, why do people think there are more births or crime rates or whatever major events during a full moon phase? Confirmation bias. No one ever looks up after a momentous occasion during the day to note the new moon now, do they? I read somewhere that prior to electric lights being common, people tended to be more active on nights with a full moon simply because they could see better. It would make sense that better illumination at night could lead to a rise in crime and birth rates under those circumstances. Story 3. Staying up for several days will not result in the Russian sleeping experiment, not even talking about how they were able to stay alive after so much blood loss. Insomnia would likely not even reach that level shown in that story. What's more accurate is your fine motor skills will decrease significantly, as well as your attention span and, of course, energy. In some cases, you'll have less of an appetite and may even have diarrhea. If you go long enough, your immune system will fail completely, and you'll be at a higher risk for depression and anxiety-based mental illnesses. Story 4, organic food is more healthy or nutritious than conventionally grown or genetically modified food. Total bunk. There is no evidence to support this, maybe except for the case of vitamin A content in milk, since organic cows tend to eat more grass. But you probably aren't vitamin A deficient. And if you are, you might consider eating some of that sweet golden rice. Also, there is no evidence to suggest that GMOs are more harmful to consumers or the environment than other types of plant. Story 5, scientists can't explain why bumblebees are able to fly. That's a myth. In the 1930s, two French scientists wrote that the fixed-wing lift equations don't seem to work for bees. All that means is that bee flight isn't fixed-wing, but there are other ways for things to fly. In 1996, scientists determined that insect wings flap so quickly that they generate vortices, which in turn provide enough lift to keep them airborne. So this myth came about because of scientists in the 1930s saying, "We tried one of the many ways to explain bee flight, and that didn't work." It was debunked 21 years ago, and yet it was still prominently featured in Bee Movie, and Dairy Queen Wendy's currently features the myth in an ad campaign. Story 6. Camels don't carry water in their humps. Their humps are made of fat, which is primarily for use in the desert as an emergency food store if they can't find any, and collected in one spot, so that it minimizes the insulating effect a layer of fat would normally have. Instead, they have adapted to lose much less water on a daily basis, as well as having a number of adaptations that allow them to withstand the effects of dehydration. Examples of this are their kidney and intestines, which effectively recycle as much water as possible, as well as oval red blood cells, which allow for easy blood flow even when dehydrated. They also rarely sweat and can moderate their own body temperature to help with this. Their nostrils have even adapted in such a way as to trap the water vapor that would normally be lost by breathing. While I am at it, they don't spit in the traditional sense either. It's more like cud that they spit up and sling in every direction to get people to back off, so basically vomit. It's not as precise as one would think. I had assumed that storing water in their hump was a known myth by now, but nevertheless, I find myself having to tell families at my zoo on an almost daily basis about both of these facts. But half of my job is teaching, so I'm glad to help dispel myths about the animals I work with. Story 7. That a poison ivy rash, post-cleaning, can continue to be spread by scratching. If you get poison ivy, as long as the skin has been cleaned of all oils from the plant, it cannot be spread again by scratching it. I literally had to rub my poison ivy covered arm on my face to prove this to my roommate. It's the oils in the plant that spread it. The reason people think it can continue to spread is that it can take a week for everything to appear. But once the oils are gone, no more spreading of the ailment. Story 8, that the Catholic Church was anti science and tried to stop scientific progress while also liberally burning witches who were really wise, vaguely pagan midwives and doctors. During medieval times, the Catholic Church was a serious scientific authority, saved tons of knowledge that would otherwise be lost, fostered literacy, and used a universal language for its scientific endeavors. For instance, Galileo wasn't wrongfully imprisoned for challenging church doctrine, but because he made a claim without evidence. He was told to teach it as a theory and not a fact, ignored that directive, while also insulting the Pope. The Renaissance actually saw a dip in proper science, because thanks to the lifting of the taboo on magic, the science-minded upper class suddenly started experimenting with that, trying to cast spells and crap. Newton, for instance, only bumbled upon his groundbreaking work in physics in between lengthy bouts of trying to discover the philosopher's stone. Also, the iconic with hunting manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, was put on the Vatican's blacklist. Despite this, it became popular and is responsible for our current day interpretation of witches as largely female. Witch hunters were con men who appealed to fear and hysteria in order to make a quick buck. The church was generally skeptical of witchcraft because the Bible states that magic does not exist. Story 9, Alpha and Beta Wolves. Wolf packs are usually just family units. A mated pair and their offspring stick around for a period of time. A few years, it varies for each. While each year the mated pair has more offspring, so various aged children hunt with their parents until they decide to go off and create their own family. The whole alpha and beta thing came from studying wolves in captivity, which has a completely different and forced social dynamic than the wild, and was one researcher who came up on it, but everyone else latched onto. Story 10, Eating carrots improves your eyesight. The history behind this myth is quite interesting. In World War II, Britain's air ministry spread the word that a diet of these vegetables helped pilots see German bombers attacking at night. That was a lie intended to cover the real matter of what was underpinning the Royal Air Force's successes: airborne interception radar, also known as AI. The secret new system pinpointed some enemy bombers before they reached the English Channel. British intelligence didn't want the Germans to find out about the superior new technology helping protect the nation, so they created a rumor to afford a somewhat plausible sounding explanation for the sudden increase in bombers being shot down. News stories began appearing in the British press about extraordinary personnel manning the defenses, including Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham, an RAF pilot dubbed Cat's Eyes, on the basis of his exceptional night vision that allowed him to spot his prey in the dark. Cunningham's abilities were chalked up to his love of carrots. Further stories claimed RAF pilots were being fed good amounts of this root vegetable to foster similar abilities in them. Story 12, The Book of Mormon. Not a single non-Mormon believes that it is a historical record of pre-Columbian Native Americans. The book has been definitively disproved for nearly 2 centuries, but faithful Mormons ignore the evidence to grasp onto the lack of evidence that confirms what they already believe. Even leaders tell members that no one has been able to refute the book, but they are lying or ignorant, so members don't question it. This is why the LDS movement is hemorrhaging younger people, as they are better at accessing accurate information than their parents. Story 13, Homeopathy was invented before the germ theory of disease, is as close as makes no difference to 100% water. Most of it doesn't have a single molecule of the alleged active ingredient, and it has no scientifically plausible mechanism for working to cure any ailment of any sort other than a possible placebo effect. This has been proved over and over and over and over again for 100 years by well-designed studies and Cochrane reviews, meta-studies of studies. Story 14. Not so sure if it has been debunked several times, but I'm sure it has been debunked. But salt. Putting salt in your food so you know it actually tastes of what you put in there, like all chefs in the world do, they put enough salt in, won't affect your heart at all. When I hear people saying that they don't salt their food, I just assume you are an idiot, and the food you serve me will taste like crap. Everything you cook, just putting, little or much depending on what, will enhance the flavors. I'm way late to the thread, but please. Story 15, you must wait 24 hours before reporting a missing person. Some questions. 24 hours from when? The time you realized they were missing? The time you estimate they went missing? The time of the initial report to police? Who is the legal timekeeper? If this is a law, it must have a designated timekeeper for official records. City police? County sheriff? Do I hire a private attorney to file a timekeeping motion in court? If the most likely time to find a missing person is the first 24 hours, why would you wait 24 hours? If the person dies or is severely injured because the county and state refuse to initiate a search, doesn't that put some liability on their office? It seems like that would have been tested in court by now. There's no law governing how long you have to wait before notifying the police of a missing person. It's nonsense. File a report as soon as you suspect the person is missing or in danger. Do you know how many wellness checks officers go on in a day? Call it in man. Story 16. If you get too close to a baby bird, the mother will smell human on the baby and abandon the nest. You probably should still avoid touching baby birds for other reasons like disease or risking injury to the animal, though. Since I'm already on the topic of animal myths, another common myth is the daddy longleg is the most venomous spider in the world, but it can't bite you because its fangs are too tiny. This myth is wrong on both accounts. They do have venom, but it's essentially harmless to humans and they can bite you. The pain just typically isn't as severe as something like a brown recluse. Edit. To clear up a lot of confusion, the term daddy longleg can mean something different in different parts of the world. There are three creatures that commonly go by the name: the cranefly, the harvestman, and the house spider. Story 17, shaving makes hair grow back thicker. When I was learning how to shave, I remember this one being debunked in a teen magazine. What they said made sense. A new hair grows with a kind of pointed tip. When you shave, you cut off that part. So what is now growing is middle of the hair, which is thicker. I would also add, I started shaving before my hair was fully grown in, moving from pre-adolescence to adulthood. And hair continues to come in thicker over time. So it has more to do with when females often start shaving compared to having reached full maturity. Story 18. That the Coriolis effect has any relevant bearing on how water drains from a sink, a bathtub, or especially a toilet. I was actually taught this by a teacher. The design of toilets direct water in a specific way. The Coriolis effect would never change that. But even in more passive drainage systems, the internal flow of water and geometry of the basin will be much more significant than that of the Coriolis effect. This is true even if water sits still for long periods of time. Under very specific scientific conditions, with a flat, perfectly circular pan and a centralized drainage hole, many days after filling the water, the Coriolis effect can begin to govern the direction of the water as it's emptied. But this is not exactly practical. We do see the effect in weather patterns, of course, though, so that's something. Story 19, Russians use pencils in space. I think originally it was a joke about how the USA spent so much money on developing a zero-G pen that could write upside down without leaking all over the place, but the USSR just sent their men up with pencils. Now, I knew this was unlikely as the shavings from a regular pencil would go everywhere. I remember emptying the classroom grinder as a messy chore, and I think every backpack I owned from first grade on had a fine dust of hand-flaked shavings at the bottom. But I also know from art supplies that there is a peel-away paper style of pencil or mechanical pencil, often with wax lead. So I thought maybe that's what they used. Nope. I am turning 40 next month, and someone finally told me I was wrong. Did you know that's a myth? Yeah, they also had to do zero-G pen research. I countered with the paper peel or mechanical pencil idea. It's not the wood shavings. That fine graphite dust would be hell on electronics as an electrical conductor, and there would be no way to control it. They made pens, too. I don't know about wax pencils. It might be too cold up there at times. So, I knew there had to be more to the story, but for over a third of my life, I believed a joke relayed to me as truth from my father, now retired engineer at Lockheed Missiles in Space. about the budget savings of the USSR. It has made me question a lot of facts I took for granted because Dad is smart and he said, Story 20, that handling a baby bird will make the mother reject it because it smells you on the baby. Most birds don't have a significant sense of smell, so put the naked baby back in the nest. Now, sometimes mother birds will push a sick or otherwise terminal chick out of the nest. So when people try to put it back, she goes, Hey, thought I got rid of you, and does it again. But that's not because of you, she just knows something you don't. So take that babe to a rehab rescue and hope for the best. But a lot of the time, the little squishy beans just wiggle out of the nest, so feel free to put them back in. No harm done. Oh, also, carrots don't help your eyes' night vision. That was made up by the Brits to mask the fact they had developed radar during the war. Story 21, Wage Gap. It only applies when you look at all men versus all women. When you break it down job by job and compare people with the same qualifications and experience, it disappears. When women start taking on the high-paying, dirty, and dangerous jobs, think your coal miners, your plumbers, your roofers, your farm hands, your bricklayers, your sanitation engineers, your road workers, your oil rig workers, and to a much lesser extent, your STEM-related jobs. Only then will the broadly applied wage gap disappear. And it will take time to encourage women into those unpleasant, back-breaking jobs that are necessary for society to keep running smoothly. But there is progress happening. But the money is there and waiting for anyone willing to do them. Story 22, The War of the Worlds, broadcast in 1938. We all know the story. Orson Welles broadcast War of the Worlds over the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS. But people only tuned in partway through and heard the radio announcing that machines were landing in the country and were advancing and attacking. People panicked in the streets and thought aliens really were invading. There was hysteria on the streets. People were looting and traffic jams banked up as people tried to escape. But it turns out that isn't really true. It turns out barely anyone actually listened to the broadcast. And the few that were listening knew it was Orson Welles and knew it was just a broadcasting of War of the Worlds. If there was anyone that did tune in and mishear it and panicked, it was nowhere near the hundreds and thousands that have been reported in this myth. Story 23, that human beings were once short. This is actually true. Humans are, on average, taller now than at any point in history. But human height varies based on nutrition. Both modern and medieval Europeans were taller than Georgian-era Europeans, for example. But at no point in modern history, the last 10,000 years, were humans hobbit-sized, as many people seem to believe. What really cracks me up about it is that there are so many ways people mess this up. Thomas Jefferson built his bed into the wall of his home. This way he could roll off the bed to his right, to go to his library, or roll to his left to wash up and get ready for the day. He, like most Westerners, also believed in the miasma theory of disease, which says that diseases are caused by bad air. In Jefferson's day, it was a fad amongst the American upper classes to sleep sitting up, as far from the bad air as possible. So Jefferson's bed is only like 5'5". I've repeatedly heard people look at the bed and say, wow, he was so short. I guess people were small back then. Even though there are dozens of contemporary references to Jefferson being 6'2", Story 24, Carbs are bad for you. Personal experience from someone who lost 117 pounds. Carbs are not your enemy. The whole keto thing has the highest rebound of any diet because it's not sustainable. And oftentimes the keto articles and people are pushing alternative foods that are loaded in sugar and sodium, which are the real enemies. I eat 300 grams of carbs a day, and yes, I work out. But I didn't start to lose weight until I severely reduced my sugar intake. Eat your carbs. They are nothing but good for you. If you plan on doing keto, realize it has a horrible rebound for many reasons. Yes, you will lose weight. 80% or so will not keep that weight off. I don't think people understand that it's the source of the carbs that are normally the problem. If your carbs are from chips, cookies, and other junk foods, of course you're going to be an FF. However, if you're getting carbs from brown rice or sweet potatoes, you're more than likely going to make other smart choices when it comes to other foods in your diet. Story 25. Not debunked, but commonly misinterpreted. Mentally ill people are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. A lot of people misinterpret that to mean mentally ill people are never or only rarely violent. This is usually used to fight against stigmatization of mentally ill people as dangerous, but this is incorrect. It just means that mentally ill people are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. It says nothing about the absolute likelihood of them being a perpetrator in the first place. In reality, mentally ill people are both more likely to be victims of violence and more likely to be perpetrators of violence than non mentally ill people. Removing stigmatization of mental illness is helpful, but living in a fairy tale land where violence caused by mental illness isn't a problem is not helpful.